Let me tell you, there are moments in life that hit you with the force of a freight train, but they look deceptively mundane on the surface. This was one of those moments. It was just a regular Tuesday afternoon, and I was swinging by the factory office where my husband, Ben, worked. Not a sleek glass tower, mind you, but a sprawling, older facility. Think concrete, steel, and the constant, dull hum of heavy machinery churning out parts. Ben was a manager there, a big deal in the logistics side, which meant his days were endless. He'd recently been given a new, dedicated executive assistant to handle his insane schedule, and he'd been wanting me to meet her. "She's sharp, Nat," he'd said over dinner the night before. "She's already organized 6 months of chaos." I was happy for him. He needed the help. I walked into his office, a little cramped space separated by a thin, grey partition wall from the main floor, and the first person I saw was her. She was perched on the edge of a visitor's chair, reviewing a binder, and when she looked up, my breath caught in my throat. I mean, literally, I felt a physical stoppage in my chest. It wasn't just that she was pretty, in that corporate chic kind of way. Crisp blouse, pencil skirt, perfectly manicured nails. It was the recognition that slammed into me. The air instantly thickened, turning from the standard musty factory office smell into something electric and dangerous. "Natalia, you made it," Ben said, getting up from his desk, oblivious to the fact that I was currently having an out-of-body experience. He walked over, gave me a quick, warm hug, and then gestured towards the woman. "This is Maya. Maya, this is my amazing wife, Natalia." Maya stood up, slowly, deliberately. She wasn't smiling, not really. It was more of a slow, unfolding smirk, like a cat that just cornered a mouse. Her eyes locked onto mine, and they were the same eyes I'd only ever seen in tiny, low-resolution profile pictures years ago, eyes that had seemed to hold a secret. It was her. The ghost of a painful memory, the anxiety spike I'd spent years trying to forget, suddenly materialized in front of me, holding a clipboard. She extended her hand, her expression unreadable, though that subtle, unsettling lift at the corner of her mouth gave her away. "Natalia, it's so nice to finally meet you. I feel like I've heard so much about you." Her voice was smooth, a little deeper than I expected, and completely devoid of warmth. My own hand was shaking slightly as I took hers. Her grip was firm, almost aggressive. I couldn't form a coherent sentence. All I could manage was a strained, "You too, Maya." The name felt like ash on my tongue. Ben was still beaming, oblivious. "Maya's a lifesaver, Nat. She used to work in the regional inventory center, but now she's going to be my right hand." Regional inventory center. That meant she'd been in the system, lurking in the company's vast employee database, all this time. The pieces of the puzzle I thought I'd burned years ago, were snapping together with a horrific finality. I tried to force a casual tone, to sound like a normal, supportive wife meeting her husband's new colleague. "So, you like the change of pace? From the warehouse to the office?" Maya tilted her head, maintaining that unnerving eye contact. She didn't look at Ben, only at me. "Oh, very much. I always knew I'd make my way here eventually. I actually know Ben from a long time ago. We finally work together." The final sentence hung in the air, heavy and loaded. We finally work together. It wasn't a professional comment. It was a declaration. A smug little victory chant just for my ears. It confirmed every agonizing doubt I'd ever had. Years ago, maybe 4 years into our marriage, before we moved to this city, I had found a series of cryptic, flirtatious, and late-night messages on Ben's old phone. They were vague, mostly deleted, but the ones I recovered were enough to gut me. "Can't wait to see you next week. Thinking about you. Wish you were here." I had confronted Ben. He'd sworn up and down it was just a silly, harmless coworker who was overly friendly, someone he had immediately shut down and eventually blocked. He swore there was nothing physical, nothing emotional, and that he'd made it clear he was married and committed. He blamed the time zones and the stress of a big project they were on together. I wanted to believe him. I needed to believe him. And eventually, I did. We went through counseling, we rebuilt the trust, and we put that painful chapter away in a locked box. Now, the lid was off, and the secret was wearing a tasteful beige blazer and giving me the eye. The panic was starting to give way to a cold, hard anger. This wasn't a coincidence. This was an invasion. This woman didn't just happen to apply for an assistant job with the man she had been texting years ago. She was here for a reason, and that reason was me, or rather, the destruction of what Ben and I had built. I squeezed Maya's hand a little tighter before letting go. "Well, I hope you have a long, productive career here, Maya," I said, making sure the word productive sounded as sterile and non-committal as possible. Ben, still oblivious, clapped his hands together. "Right, well, let me show you the new production reports, honey. And Maya, I need those inventory sheets consolidated by 5. He was already back in work mode. As Ben turned his back to grab a file, Maya stepped slightly closer to me, her eyes darting to make sure Ben wasn't watching. She leaned in, just a fraction, and her voice dropped to a low, venomous whisper that only I could hear. "Oh, I plan on being very, very productive, Natalia." Then she winked. A slow, unmistakable wink that felt like a punch to the gut. The sheer audacity of it left me speechless. She was confirming it, challenging me, right there in the heart of my husband's professional life. I felt the blood drain from my face, then rush back, hot and fast. This wasn't just an old flame. This was a calculated threat. I had to play it cool, though. I couldn't reveal my hand yet, not while Ben was right there. I took a deep, shaky breath, trying to slow my racing heart. But honestly, in that moment, all the old pain and new fear crystallized into one single powerful thought. This woman had to go. And I knew, deep down, that she wouldn't last long once I figured out how to use her own past against her. This was war, and she had just declared it. Before I get too deep into the office espionage and marriage defense, I'm curious. Have you ever had a moment of intense, "Oh no, this person is back" recognition? Drop a comment below right now and tell me where and when you were watching this video when that realization hits. Let's rewind a little because you need to understand the man Maya was targeting. My husband, Ben. He wasn't some high-flying stockbroker in a Manhattan penthouse. He was the king of the factory floor. Our office was in a huge, low-slung building, part administrative hub, part logistics center, connected to an enormous warehouse where they manufactured specialized industrial components. Think heavy machinery, steel beams, the smell of grease and metal dust even in the office air conditioning. Ben's title was Director of Operations for the region. That means he managed the entire logistical ballet, from raw materials coming in one end of the country to finished products getting shipped out the other. It was an incredibly high-pressure job that involved insane hours and constant crisis management. When a shipment got delayed in customs, or a machine broke down and halted production, it was Ben's name on the angry emails and 2 a.m. phone calls. He was good at it, though. He had this calm, focused intensity. He wasn't loud or flashy. He was the guy who quietly, systematically fixed everything. When I first met him, he was just a shift supervisor, but I always saw that potential. He's got these kind eyes and a genuinely kind heart, but when he's focused on a problem, he gets this furrow in his brow that means the gears are turning at warp speed. That intensity, that work ethic, is what got him to the director level by his mid-30s. The only downside was the work itself. It was all-consuming. Our life wasn't exactly glamorous. No fancy corporate parties every weekend. It was more like, "Honey, can you grab me dinner? I'm going to be here until midnight going over inventory reports." I learned to adapt. Our dates were often me bringing takeout to his office and sitting on his worn visitor's couch while he finished up a few emails. The setting of this story, this huge humming factory office, was basically our second home. He needed this assistant, Maya, badly. For months, he'd been doing the work of 2 people. His desk was perpetually buried under stacks of papers, and his calendar looked like a confusing game of Tetris. When he told me HR was finally allocating him a dedicated executive assistant, I was ecstatic. A professional organizer for your professional chaos. I joked. He had interviewed a few people, But Ben is the kind of guy who trusts his gut more than a resume. He said Maya, who had been working in a different, more isolated branch of the company, just had this sharp, no-nonsense air about her in the interview. She understood the factory's unique language and workflow immediately. He genuinely believed he had found a rock star. She already completely reorganized my digital filing system in 3 hours, Nat, he told me, sounding relieved just days before I met her. I think she's going to be the difference between me going crazy and me actually making it home before 9 p.m. He was so proud, so genuinely optimistic about this change. And seeing him so happy was why my blood ran cold when I saw her and realized her identity. That sheer joy and relief he felt was exactly what she seemed poised to exploit. She hadn't just accepted the job, she had maneuvered for it. It was too much of a coincidence. She had to have been watching, waiting for an opening to get close to him again. And in this environment, this intensely focused, high-stakes, stressful environment, proximity equals power. I watched them interact during that brief moment in his office. Ben was completely normal, professional, and casually friendly. Maya, I'm waiting on those specs from the engineering team. Did you get that tracking number? He asked, completely immersed in his work. I tracked it down, Ben. They sent it to your personal inbox by mistake. I just forwarded it to your work email and flagged it urgent, she replied, her voice all business when she spoke to him. It was only when she looked at me that the mask slipped. I could see the dynamic forming instantly. She wasn't just doing the job, she was anticipating his needs before he even articulated them. She wasn't just an assistant, she was making herself indispensable. She was the ghost in the machine, and she was optimizing her position right now. I tried to tell myself I was overreacting. Maybe it was just a coincidence. Maybe Ben was telling the truth 4 years ago, and she really was just an overly friendly colleague he shut down. And maybe, just maybe, she genuinely needed a career change and this job was the perfect fit. But that smirk, that venomous whisper of, I plan on being very, very productive, shot those rational thoughts down in flames. It felt like I was standing on a solid floor that was suddenly turning into quicksand. I remember looking around the office, at the familiar grey walls and the blueprints taped up behind Ben's desk, trying to anchor myself in reality. This was my life, our life, built on shared trust and hard work in a place like this. I wasn't going to let a blast from the past, especially one who had the nerve to openly threaten me, shatter it. My first thought was, I need to know exactly what happened back then. I had forced myself to forget the details, to erase the painful facts in order to move forward with Ben. But now, forgetting was a liability. I needed to dig up the past, not just to protect my marriage, but to understand the depth of Maya's obsession. The sheer logistics of the factory and the office made this even more complicated. It was a place of total efficiency, constant surveillance, for safety and inventory, and a rigid hierarchy. Maya was now Ben's gatekeeper. Getting to him, or getting information about him, would be almost impossible without going through her. She was already setting up boundaries, subtle ones, but I noticed them. When I tried to schedule a dinner later that week, Ben said, just check with Maya first, Nat. She's coordinating my travel schedule for the supply run. She was already controlling the flow of information and access. She had infiltrated the fortress. And now I had to figure out how to be the Trojan horse. My mission, which felt insane and terrifying, was clear. Find the evidence that proved this was a calculated move, and then expose her before she had a chance to execute her long game. The thing about emotional pain is how it warps your sense of history. You try to forget the worst parts so you can move forward. That's what I did with the discovery years ago, of the ghost in the machine. Those unsettling late-night messages on Ben's old work phone. It happened about a year after we moved, during a really dark time in our marriage. Ben was working insane hours, sometimes sleeping on the floor of his old office just to catch a few hours before the morning shift started. We were barely speaking, just passing each other in the apartment like weary ships in the night. One weekend, I was tidying up a drawer, and I found his old decommissioned work phone, a brick of a thing the company had replaced. For some reason, I powered it up. Maybe it was intuition, Maybe it was the gnawing loneliness, but I went through it. What I found wasn't a smoking gun in the traditional sense, but it was 1,000 little cuts. A trail of communication, mostly text messages, from an unsaved number. They were from someone who clearly knew his schedule, his stress points, and was injecting just enough sympathy and flirtation to make my stomach turn. I remember one message that read, "Rough day. You deserve a break. Don't tell your wife, but I brought you that artisanal coffee you like. Left it on your desk after hours, winking face." Another one later was more direct. "Can't wait for our project to wrap up. It's the only time I get to see you outside of these boring emails. Thinking about you." I confronted him, of course. It was an explosive fight that lasted nearly the entire night. The memory of that night is still raw. The shouting, the tears, the feeling that the foundation of our life was crumbling into dust. Ben was devastated. He was very defensive at first, then remorseful. He admitted he had been exchanging texts with a coworker during a particularly intense project. He said she was aggressive, she misunderstood his professional kindness for interest, and that the messages were just banter. He swore on everything that was holy that he had never met her outside of work, nothing physical had ever happened, and that he had put a firm stop to it when it started getting too personal. He showed me a few of his own replies, short, professional, and slightly evasive, clearly trying to manage the situation without causing workplace drama. I remember him saying, "Nat, I was tired, I was stressed, and I was stupidly flattered by the attention. But I love you. I never crossed a line." I blocked her number immediately after I realized how inappropriate it was getting. "She's gone, she's out of my life, I promise." We went to counseling, as I mentioned. We worked through the trust issues. I forced myself to accept his version of the story, that it was an emotional flirtation, a momentary slip in judgment under extreme stress, and that he had genuinely shut her down. The name, which I think he only mentioned once, was vague, something generic like Maya or Maria. I deleted the messages, deleted the contact, and made a conscious decision to bury the memory and move forward. To me, she became the ghost in the machine, a faceless digital entity that represented a flaw in our armor, a moment of weakness we had overcome. Until Tuesday, when the ghost materialized in a beige blazer. Now, sitting in the silence of my own kitchen later that evening, I couldn't shake the chilling implication of that moment. Ben was home, already asleep, exhausted from his day. I was wide awake, the adrenaline still pumping. The way she looked at me, the smirk, the sheer confidence in her voice. We finally worked together. That wasn't the demeanor of a professional assistant who happened to have a history with her boss. That was the look of a predator who had successfully tracked her prey. She hadn't just applied for the job. She had pursued it. The factory office, remember, is huge, but Ben's position is senior. She had to navigate internal transfers, interviews, and HR approval to land specifically in his office, as his gatekeeper. That takes planning, research, and a motive that goes far beyond a simple career move. My biggest fear wasn't that Ben would relapse or that they would start an affair now. My fear was that Maya hadn't just been blocked and shut down years ago. My fear was that Ben's memory, or his retelling, was incomplete, or even worse, a lie of omission. And her presence now suggested she was back to finish whatever she felt was owed to her. I felt a wave of nausea. I had trusted Ben. I had put 4 years of careful work into rebuilding that trust. Was I now going to rip that band-aid off and look at the festering wound underneath? Could I even risk telling Ben that his new, life-saving assistant was the same woman who had almost torpedoed our marriage? He would dismiss it, call me paranoid, jealous. He was relying on her too much already. No, I couldn't go to Ben first. I had to gather undeniable proof of her predatory behavior and her calculated return. My first task was going to be the hardest. Finding those old messages, the ones I had deleted in my misguided attempt to heal and forget. I had switched phones since then, but I was a digital pack rat. There had to be an old backup somewhere, an old hard drive, a cloud archive. I had to find the digital footprint of the ghost in the machine to prove she wasn't just a ghost. She was a very real, very present threat. The fight wasn't going to be about who Ben chose. It was going to be about who was the more determined detective. She wanted to destroy his career and our marriage. I just wanted to protect it. And I knew the battlefield, the subtle, highly pressurized environment of the factory office. The atmosphere in Ben's office the day after my initial encounter with Maya was so thick you could cut it with one of those industrial box cutters from the factory floor. This wasn't just a simple meeting. It was the setup meeting, a carefully orchestrated display of professional dominance designed to put me squarely in my place. The civilian, the outsider, the irrelevant wife. Ben had insisted I come in because they were having an informal, quick, team lunch in his office. A glorified 20-minute working session where they'd review the next week's travel itinerary. He probably thought it was a sweet gesture, a way to integrate Maya into our life and show me he had nothing to hide. To me, it felt like being invited to a cage fight where I was the only one wearing street clothes. I brought in artisanal sandwiches from the nice little cafe downtown, trying to maintain some semblance of normal domesticity. Maya, meanwhile, had ordered in from a bland corporate catering place. 3 identical Tupperware containers filled with colorless chicken and steamed vegetables. Her message was clear, my nice effort was amateur, and her approach was strictly business. The minute I walked in, she was already there, positioned perfectly. Not at her own desk, which was just outside Ben's partition, but sitting at the small round table inside his actual office, her laptop open, spreadsheets glowing on the screen. She looked like she belonged there more than I did. She was wearing a crisp, structured black dress that screamed power. Natalia. Thanks for bringing food, Ben said cheerfully, taking a sandwich. He truly seemed happy, which only amplified my simmering resentment. Maya already ordered something healthy for us, but I'll definitely take the prosciutto. Maya didn't even look up from her screen immediately. When she finally did, she offered that minimal, practiced smile. It's a good thing I ordered, Ben. You have an investor call in 45 minutes, and we need to finalize the talking points on the Q3 production dip. No time for heavy carbs that induce a food coma, Natalia. Especially not for the director. The subtext was deafening. You are distracting him. I am protecting him. I am necessary. You are a risk. I forced a laugh that sounded brittle, even to my own ears. Oh, I'm sure Ben can handle a sandwich, Maya. He manages a multi-million-dollar supply chain. I think he can manage a little prosciutto. Ben, bless his naive heart, was completely oblivious. She's right, Nat, gotta stay sharp, he said, taking a small bite of the artisanal sandwich, then immediately reaching for the consolidated report Maya had printed out. The rest of the lunch was less about eating and more about her professional ballet. She spoke in rapid-fire business jargon, referencing specific factory floor protocols and logistics software that only Ben truly understood. It was a conscious effort to exclude me, to make me feel small and out of my depth. The QA reports for the S49 line show a 3% variance, Ben, which we should flag before the morning huddle. I've already pre-drafted your email to engineering requesting an immediate inspection. Just need your sign-off, she said, pushing a tablet toward him. Perfect, Maya, you're a machine, Ben replied, signing it without even reading the whole thing. The level of trust he had developed in her in just days was alarming. It was the same blind trust he had given her years ago, only now, the professional stakes were exponentially higher. I tried to interject, to ground the conversation back to something personal, something us. So, Maya, Ben mentioned you were originally from the inventory center. That's a long drive. How do you handle the commute? She finally lifted her head, and her eyes held that familiar, cold amusement. I actually just moved to an apartment 10 minutes from the office, Natalia. It's much more convenient for early starts and late finishes, which this job, as you know, requires. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. Moving closer to his office? It could be coincidence, sure, but in the context of her history and her blatant smirk, it felt like another calculated step in her invasion plan. She was eliminating any physical barrier to her access to Ben, making herself the constant, reliable presence he was missing at home due to his grueling schedule. I knew I couldn't just sit there and let her run roughshod over me. I had to plant my own flag, even if it was just a small one. That's great, Maya. You know, Ben and I have been married for nearly 8 years now, and the biggest lesson we've learned is that you have to prioritize work-life balance, I said, my voice steady, my gaze locked on hers. He's amazing at his job, but I make sure he remembers that the factory doesn't own his entire life. Right, honey. Ben looked up from the quarterly budget projection, slightly startled. Yeah, Nat's my anchor. Couldn't do any of this without her, keeping my head on straight. He gave me a loving, distracted smile. Maya didn't flinch. She just offered a pitying, saccharine expression. Of course. But being an executive assistant to a director means sometimes you have to be the one who is the anchor in the office, especially during critical production cycles. It's a very demanding role, professionally. I'm just here to make sure Ben succeeds, Natalia. Anything less would be a disservice to the company and to him. The emphasis on professionally and succeeds was a clear dig. She was implying that my role as his wife was secondary, domestic, and ultimately distracting, while her role was vital and instrumental to his success. She had brilliantly framed herself as his partner in achievement, and me as a sentimental accessory. As the meeting wrapped up, Ben had to rush to his investor call, and I gathered my empty Tupperware. Maya watched me, arms crossed, one eyebrow slightly raised. It was lovely seeing you again, Natalia. I really enjoy working with Ben, she said, the word enjoy stretched out and laced with implied intimacy. I held her gaze, my voice dropping to a low, cold register that matched hers. You know, Maya, I have a very good memory, especially when it comes to people who try to interfere with my family. Be careful how you choose your priorities here. Her smirk returned, wider and more confident this time. I always choose my priorities, Natalia, and I always get what I go after. I left the office that day not just angry, but terrified. This wasn't just a threat to my marriage. It was a psychological operation. She was clever, relentless, and Ben was walking right into her trap, blinded by her professional competence. I realized the evidence of the past was no longer enough. I needed evidence of her current intent, and I needed it fast. Maya's initial confidence from the setup meeting quickly morphed into something far more insidious, subtle sabotage. She wasn't just working hard, she was working hard to make Ben's life manageable while simultaneously sowing tiny, almost imperceptible seeds of chaos that only I, watching from the outside with hypervigilance, could recognize. Her goal wasn't just to replace me in his emotional life. It was to position herself as the only person who could save him from the professional pitfalls she was covertly creating. Remember, this is a factory office. Efficiency is everything. A minor logistics error can cost the company thousands, even halt a production line. Ben, trusting and relying on his rock star assistant, was handing over more and more autonomy. That's where Maya started to twist the knife. The sabotage wasn't dramatic. It wasn't like she was deleting files or sending forged emails. That would be too obvious. It was all about plausible deniability, leveraging the inherent chaos of the operation. For example, Ben would come home stressed, complaining about a sudden, inexplicable delay in receiving a critical batch of imported components. I don't get it, Nat, he'd groan, rubbing his temples. Maya swore she confirmed the delivery date for the S9 line components a week ago. Now they're saying it's 3 days late. We're going to miss the Jensen contract deadline. He'd be completely frantic, and then Maya would swoop in the next morning, sending him a calm, almost heroic email that he'd forward to me. Found the issue, Ben. The customs clearance was entered under an outdated vendor code, a small clerical error on the original form, probably by the previous assistant. I personally called customs and expedited the paperwork. Shipments will be on site by 10 a.m. tomorrow. Crisis averted. C. She created the crisis by using a minor, easily overlooked error, blaming the previous assistant, who couldn't defend herself, let Ben stew in the fear of failure for 12 hours, and then emerged as the brilliant problem solver. She wasn't just fixing errors. She was manufacturing opportunities to look indispensable. Ben would praise her endlessly, completely unaware that she had been the one to introduce the flaw into the system in the first place. Another instance was the lunch appointments. Ben's job requires him to regularly schmooze key suppliers and prospective clients. Maya was in charge of scheduling these. I noticed a pattern. She was consistently booking Ben's most important meetings, the ones he really needed to nail, at obscure, noisy, or inconvenient locations far from the office. A major investor lunch was scheduled at a sports bar next to a construction site. A key supplier meetup was booked at a coffee shop that had no quiet tables and notoriously spotty Wi-Fi. Ben would come back frustrated, saying, "The noise level at that lunch spot was impossible, Nat. We couldn't hear ourselves think. It felt so unprofessional. I think I blew that deal." And when he'd mention it to Maya, she'd be full of wide-eyed innocence and a pre-prepared excuse. "Oh, Ben, I'm so sorry. I chose that location because it was centrally located for the supplier's travel route. I even checked the reviews, but they must have started construction since then. Next time, I'll personally vet the location." She'd take the blame, but it was a passive, forgivable blame, the blame of overeagerness, not malice. Meanwhile, Ben looked disorganized and unprofessional to his most crucial contacts. The worst part was how she started managing his personal access. She became a concrete wall between Ben and everyone else, including me. I'd call his work line, and she'd intercept. "Ben is in a critical strategy meeting, Natalia. Can I take a message?" she'd say, her voice oozing professional politeness, but her tone suggesting I was being an interruption. She'd delay passing on my non-urgent calls and messages until late in the evening, ensuring that Ben's only constant, immediately available contact during the day was her. She was also doing this bizarre thing where she'd leave a personal item on his desk before I came in. A colorful, very un-office-like water bottle, a small, brightly patterned notebook, a particular brand of mints he liked. Just little visual cues to remind me, and maybe Ben too, of her constant, intimate presence. I knew she was doing it for my benefit, a constant, low-grade psychological warfare. I tried to talk to Ben about it, cautiously at first. "Honey, do you think Maya is too stressed? The location of that investor lunch was just terrible, and the customs mix-up was a big deal. Maybe she's overwhelmed." He just sighed. "Nat, she's human. Everyone makes mistakes. But look at the results. She fixed both problems. She's the best assistant I've ever had, and honestly, she's cutting my workload in half. I can't afford to lose her over a noisy restaurant." His defense of her was immediate and firm. The deeper her sabotage, the more she could showcase her competence in fixing it, and the more Ben relied on her. She had him trapped in a loop of manufactured crisis and heroic rescue. This only solidified my conviction. I couldn't confront her or Ben with my feelings. I needed hard, cold evidence of her history to explain her present behavior. I knew I was running out of time. With every crisis averted and every delayed lunch, Maya was cementing her place in Ben's professional life. My surveillance needed to turn into action, and the next step was resurrecting the ghost, digging up the past. The pressure was immense, and I felt like I was fighting against a ticking clock, the clock of her successful infiltration. The realization that Maya was engaged in subtle sabotage was the pivot point. I couldn't rely on Ben's judgment anymore. His vision was completely clouded by her manufactured competence. My only way forward was to prove that her presence was a deliberate, malicious attack, and that meant embarking on the high-stakes mission of digging up the past. My heart was in my throat, but my focus was laser-sharp. I knew I had deleted those text messages years ago, but in a moment of panicked, tearful preservation, I had done something I almost forgot. I had backed up the contents of that old, defunct phone to a rarely used external hard drive before we switched carriers. The hard drive lived in a forgotten box of old cables and electronics in the back of our storage unit. It was like hunting for a needle in an industrial haystack, but that needle was the proof that could save my marriage. It took me a tense, dusty Saturday afternoon to find the box, haul it home, and connect the clunky drive to my laptop. The drive was ancient. It whirred and clicked ominously, taking forever to load the file directory. I felt like I was watching a suspense movie in slow motion. Finally, a folder popped up, Ben's old phone backup, 2018. The date alone sent a shiver down my spine. It was the date of the dark period we had tried so hard to erase. Navigating the ancient file structure was a nightmare. The messages weren't organized neatly in a chat log. They were buried in a database file format that required specialized software to read. I spent the next 4 hours downloading and installing different message recovery and forensics programs. The kind of stuff you only ever Google when you're facing a personal crisis of this magnitude. Finally, one program clicked. It spat out a long, chronological list of text exchanges. I scrolled past hundreds of boring work texts, supply orders, and vendor confirmations, my fingers aching with anticipation and dread. And then, there they were. The ghost's messages. It was worse than I remembered. Years of selective memory had sanitized the details, but seeing them laid bare on the screen was like a fresh wound. It wasn't just, "Can't wait to see you next week." There was context, names, and specifics that Ben had conveniently left out. I found a thread where she had clearly initiated a late-night chat, claiming she was lonely and stressed, and then steering the conversation toward Ben's marriage, asking leading questions like, "Does Natalia really understand the kind of pressure you're under?" And, "It must be hard being married to someone who doesn't work in the industry." The classic emotional manipulator tactic. Isolate the target by sowing seeds of doubt about their partner's understanding. And then, I saw the one detail that Ben had never, ever mentioned. In one exchange, Ben was clearly trying to shut her down, writing a very short, firm text. "Maya, please keep this professional. I'm married. We can't talk about personal things like this." A moment of integrity on his part, which he had mentioned. But her reply, the one I had either missed or forgotten, was chilling. It read, "Understood, Ben. For now. But I'm very patient. I always get the job I want." Maya. Her actual name, right there, confirmed. And that terrifying phrase, "I always get the job I want." It wasn't about a promotion or a new position back then. It was about him. The double meaning was crystal clear now. She didn't just want a job near him. She wanted him as the prize. And the fact that she had used the word patient confirmed that this wasn't a sudden, heat-of-the-moment thing. This was a long-term, calculated strategy. I printed out that entire thread, dated and time-stamped, on my home printer. The sound of the paper spitting out felt like the execution of my strategy. This was no longer hearsay or wifely intuition. This was proof of premeditation and obsession. With the evidence clutched in my hand, I finally had the leverage I needed. I realized that confronting Ben with this wouldn't work yet. He would panic, try to talk to her, and she would simply deny it, call me crazy, and spin the entire situation into a professional harassment claim against him. I knew her game. My target wasn't Ben. My target was the system. The rules. The professional environment that Maya was using as her shield. I had to hit her where she lived, her career, before she could land the final blow to my marriage. My mind immediately zeroed in on the one department that cares about workplace ethics, inappropriate behavior, and historical conflicts of interest more than anyone else. HR. Human Resources. They would see the pattern, the history of inappropriate messages, and the suspicious transfer. The fact that she was currently Ben's assistant, a position of power and access, made the previous communications a massive professional liability. I carefully folded the printouts and tucked them into a sealed envelope. This was my weapon. But before I deployed it, I knew I had one final opportunity to observe Maya's behavior and gather present-day context. The factory was hosting its annual employee appreciation dinner that coming Friday. Maya would be there, sitting by Ben, basking in her temporary glory. That night would be the perfect public setting for her to make a fatal mistake. A mistake that would give the historical evidence the current-day context it needed to be truly explosive. The stage was set for the office dinner. The annual employee appreciation dinner was the perfect stage for the final confrontation. It wasn't a glamorous gala. This was a factory office, remember. It was held in a rented-out ballroom at a mid-range hotel, full of slightly too loud music, lukewarm buffet food, and people in their slightly too dressy Sunday best. But for me, it was the office dinner, the battleground where Maya was set to make her brazen move, and where I had the chance to deliver the first, decisive blow. I arrived with Ben, who was in a rare good mood. He was relaxed, dressed in a nice suit, and genuinely happy to be out of the office. He still felt that Maya was a godsend. He'd even mentioned that she had organized his itinerary for the entire next quarter perfectly. The irony of him praising her organizational skills while I had a printout of her psychological warfare tucked into my clutch was almost unbearable. The seating arrangement was exactly what I expected. Ben, as director, was seated at the head table. Maya, as his assistant and constant shadow, was seated right beside him, in the chair that years ago I would have assumed was mine. I, the wife, was politely placed in the next seat over, which meant I had a front-row view of the show. Maya was radiant. She wore a stunning emerald green dress that was stylish, professional, yet undeniably attention-grabbing. It was a conscious choice designed to make her look like his partner, the other half of the power couple at the table. She completely ignored me for the first hour, focusing all her attention on Ben and the VP of operations seated next to him. She was performing. She referenced insider jokes, brought up details about the Q4 projections only Ben truly knew, and laughed just a little too heartily at his professional anecdotes. She was creating a narrative for everyone around them. We are a unit. We are indispensable. We are succeeding together. I watched as she subtly guided the conversation away from Ben's personal life and toward his professional future. A future, she implied, that she was essential to. She wasn't flirting in an obvious way. She was performing an intimacy of the intellect and of shared pressure. She'd lean in conspiratorially and whisper a logistical detail to him, or gently touch his arm when making a point about the S6-line inventory. It was all highly controlled, plausible deniability flirtation. Then came the opening I was waiting for. After dinner, the CEO gave a speech, thanking the employees. It was generic, but it meant everyone was paying attention. As the applause died down, Ben was about to stand up to respond with a few words about his team's hard work, but Maya beat him to it. She stood up slightly before him, glass in hand, still looking perfectly polished. "Before Ben stands up," she said, her voice clear and carrying across the ballroom, "I just wanted to make a quick toast. To Ben. I've only been here a short time, but I've been so impressed by his passion, his dedication, and his vision. He's the kind of leader who inspires loyalty. So far, so good, a bit over the top, but professional." Then she shifted her gaze slightly, not quite looking at me, but definitely directing her words to my corner of the table. "It takes a special kind of person," she continued, her voice softening to a dangerous, intimate murmur, "to put their whole life on hold, to dedicate those late nights, those early mornings, and to constantly put the company's needs first. It takes sacrifice. And frankly," she paused, letting the silence draw out, "it takes a lot of support. And I am so proud to be the person who supports his success every single day." It was a direct hit. She framed Ben's work ethic, which often meant missing dinner and being perpetually exhausted, as a noble sacrifice that she understood and supported, implicitly contrasting it with the perceived burden his life at home might place on him. She had publicly co-opted the role of his primary emotional and professional support. The VP of operations started to clap, and Ben, smiling awkwardly, gave her a pat on the shoulder. She had successfully cemented her narrative in front of the entire management team. My blood was boiling, but I knew this was my cue. I had to make my move. As the CEO walked past our table, heading back to his seat, I caught his eye. He was a gruff, no-nonsense man named Mr. Thompson, and he valued stability and professional decorum above all else. I stood up quickly, before anyone else could speak, and walked over to the CEO, interrupting his conversation with his wife. "Mr. Thompson, I am so sorry to interrupt," I said, keeping my voice low but firm, ensuring my eyes maintained absolute seriousness. "But there is something regarding an HR matter in Ben's department that is a severe conflict of interest and potential compliance violation. It needs to be addressed immediately. It concerns Ben's new assistant, Maya." The CEO's face, usually friendly in this setting, immediately tightened. "Natalia? Conflict of interest? What are you talking about?" "It's not for here, sir," I whispered, glancing pointedly at Maya, who was now watching us with sudden, fixed horror. But I have documentation, printed evidence, of a documented history of inappropriate communication and professional stalking from Maya towards Ben, dating back years, long before she mysteriously transferred to his direct office. I believe her transfer and her current behavior is a premeditated, calculated attempt to infiltrate his professional life and undermine his stability. I have the proof, and I need to get it to your HR director before she does any more damage to Ben's professional reputation. I had dropped the key phrases: conflict of interest, professional stalking, calculated, documentation, the corporate buzzwords that trigger an immediate, mandatory HR response. Mr. Thompson, whose face was now pale, didn't hesitate. My office. Monday. 8 a.m. Bring the documents. And do not say a word to anyone here tonight. He was already pulling out his phone to text the head of HR. I returned to the table, my heart pounding a victorious rhythm. Maya was staring at me, her face stripped of all pretense. The smirk was gone, replaced by a look of pure, cold fury. She knew I had done something catastrophic. She knew the game had changed. And that was the moment her careful, professional facade finally cracked. The fight was about to get ugly. I just had to make it through the weekend. The drive home from the office dinner was less a drive and more a pressure cooker on wheels. I had just initiated a high-level HR investigation in front of the CEO, and Maya had witnessed the entire interaction, her facade crumbling into sheer malice. I knew she was dangerous, and I knew she would strike back before Monday morning. But the immediate danger was Ben. He was quiet, not just the comfortable, tired quiet of a long evening, but a heavy, charged silence. He knew I had done something drastic, and he was finally processing the magnitude of my accusation. As soon as we were inside our front door, the silence shattered. "Natalia, what the hell was that?" he demanded, throwing his car keys onto the counter with a loud clatter. His face was a mixture of confusion, frustration, and wounded disbelief. "You publicly cornered the CEO and talked about an HR compliance violation regarding Maya. What did you do? You're going to get her fired, Ben. She's the best assistant I've ever had, and now you've jeopardized my relationship with the entire senior team." This was the confrontation. It wasn't about Maya's feelings or her job. It was about Ben's deep, immediate, almost dependent reliance on her professional support. He still couldn't see past her competence to her motive. "She's not just the best assistant, Ben. She is the same woman who was sending you those inappropriate messages years ago. The one you swore was out of your life. Don't you remember the pain we went through?" I shot back, my voice rising to match his. Years of suppressed anxiety and resentment poured out. He stopped pacing and stared at me, his eyes wide with a sudden dawning comprehension mixed with anger. "The messages. You're talking about that. Nat, that was 4 years ago. We talked it out. It was nothing. She was just a lonely coworker who was overly friendly, and I shut her down. You're letting ancient history and paranoia destroy my professional life." Paranoia. I pulled the sealed envelope from my clutch, practically tearing the paper in my urgency. She wasn't just overly friendly. She was manipulative and she was obsessed. And she told me to my face in your office that she finally got to work with you. That's not a professional transfer, Ben. That's a calculated invasion. "And what if it is?" he yelled, throwing his hands up in exasperation. "I don't care. People apply for jobs. She's efficient. She's helping me succeed in a role that was killing me. You can't just weaponize a 4-year-old harmless text thread to get rid of a competent colleague because you're jealous." His dismissal of the whole incident as harmless gutted me more than anything. It showed that he hadn't fully grasped the severity of his lapse in judgment, or the depth of the betrayal I felt back then. Harmless. I lost sleep for 6 months over those texts. We went to therapy, Ben. We rebuilt our marriage brick by brick, and you're calling the person who almost tore it down harmless and competent because she can organize your calendar. I took a shaky breath, forcing myself to calm down enough to deliver the final blow. You know what's not harmless? Her constantly sabotaging your appointments and creating crises so she can be the hero who saves you. She's trying to isolate you, Ben. She's trying to be the only one you trust. He looked genuinely stunned at the accusation of professional sabotage. Sabotage? That's insane, Nat. Those were logistical errors. Anyone can make a mistake. She fixed them. She created them. I countered. The noisy lunch, the customs clearance error that blamed the previous assistant, the strategically delayed messages. She is making you dependent on her, Ben. And you, completely blind, are letting her do it. The argument escalated into a painful, messy fight, not just about Maya, but about our core issues. Trust, his demanding career, and my feeling that I always came second to the factory's needs. The stress of his work had created the vulnerability years ago, and now his professional need had recreated the opportunity for Maya. Finally, worn down, defeated, and seeing the genuine, desperate fear in my eyes, Ben collapsed onto the couch. Look, Nat, he said, his voice raw and low. I don't know about the sabotage. But if you're right, and she is the woman from years ago, and she is doing this on purpose, then I'm an idiot. But you have to give me more than just an old memory and your intuition. HR is going to ask for hard proof. If you go in there with just your word against hers, I will look like the one who is unstable and fabricating a story to get rid of a successful employee. You could ruin my career. He was scared, and he was finally putting his professional fear above his defense of Maya. This was the opening I needed. I'm not going in with just my word, Ben, I said, my voice now soft but firm, walking over to the crumpled envelope. I extracted a single sheet of paper, the printout of the final exchange. I spent all day yesterday digging up the past. I placed the paper on the coffee table and pointed to her chilling reply from 4 years ago. Understood, Ben. For now. But I'm very patient. I always get the job I want. Read that, Ben. The date, the time, and the chilling, premeditated context. This wasn't just friendly banter. This was a promise. She called the job you 4 years ago. And she always gets the job she wants. Now, look at how she maneuvered her transfer to your office. This is professional stalking, calculated to undermine our marriage and your career. And on Monday, HR is going to see this evidence, and I need you to back me up, not her. Ben picked up the paper, his hands trembling slightly. He read the words, his face going pale. The realization hit him with the force of a hammer. He wasn't just an idiot, he had been targeted. He finally saw the pattern, the betrayal, and the danger. The fight left him, replaced by a cold, resolute fury. My God, Nat, he whispered, looking up at me, his eyes full of regret. You were right all along. I should have trusted you. You have to go to HR. And I will support you fully. Give me those documents. After the devastating fight, when Ben finally saw the printout and the damning phrase, I always get the job I want, the chaos of the past few days solidified into a single terrifying truth. This moment, where Ben accepted the reality of Maya's calculated malice, was essentially the smoking gun moment. It wasn't just the paper, it was the total shift in Ben's perception that was the final piece of evidence I needed. Seeing his face, the confusion replaced by a cold, hard anger, was vindication, but it was also incredibly painful. He realized he hadn't just been naive, he had been a pawn in her 4-year-long game. That's why he was so quick to trust her professional competence. He had been subconsciously validating his own failure to deal with her decisively years ago. Now he was seeing the true depth of her psychological maneuvering, and that meant we were finally, completely, on the same side. I need to see everything, Nat, he said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. Show me the full thread. Show me how I missed this. I sat with him on the couch late into the night, reviewing the digital forensic output from the old hard drive. We went line by line through the exchanges that had nearly ended our marriage. It was agonizing, like performing surgery on a painful memory. We analyzed her tactics, the the calculated vulnerability, the leading questions about our life, the quick pivot from lonely coworker to veiled threat, and finally, the chilling promise of her eventual return. He kept shaking his head. She's good. She's really good. Even the things she's doing now, the subtle sabotage, it makes sense. She was deliberately creating problems she could solve, so I'd rely on her for my survival here. We meticulously documented every current instance of Maya's mistakes and saves. The flawed customs code, the noisy lunch venues, the delayed messages. Ben, with his insider knowledge of logistics, was able to confirm her patterns. He remembered asking her why the customs code was wrong, and she'd given him a vague answer blaming an old system error. Now he realized she had manually inserted the error and then discovered it to look like a hero. The subtle sabotage was now confirmed, layered over the proof of her historical obsession. This was crucial. The printout was the why, proof of premeditated intent. The current sabotage was the what, proof of ongoing, unethical behavior. Together, they created an undeniable case of professional misconduct, a serious breach of company compliance, and potentially, professional harassment. "We can't wait until Monday, Ben," I stated, looking at my phone. It was already 3 a.m. Sunday. She knows I went to the CEO. She's going to spend all day Sunday covering her tracks, deleting current emails, fabricating performance reviews, doing something else to undermine you before the HR meeting. Ben agreed, the fear of losing his job now mixed with the need for immediate defense. "You're right. She's not going to sit still. But HR isn't open until Monday." Thompson said 8 a.m. Mr. Thompson is the CEO. His HR director works for him, I pointed out. This is a conflict of interest that involves the director of operations. This is an urgent, high-level matter. We need to escalate this now. Ben spent the next hour drafting a comprehensive, unemotional, bullet-pointed summary of the situation, outlining the history of communication, citing the dated evidence I possessed, the suspicious transfer, and the patterns of professional sabotage. He specifically focused on the compliance issues, misuse of company information, creating professional liability, and undermining an executive's performance. He then sent a text message to Mr. Thompson, carefully worded and professional, summarizing the grave nature of the evidence and requesting an immediate, private meeting with the head of human resources and legal counsel first thing Sunday morning, citing the risk of evidence tampering. The CEO, realizing the true gravity of the situation that I had only hinted at during the dinner, responded within 10 minutes. 9 a.m. Conference room B. Don't speak to anyone else. Bring your wife. We had confirmation. We had the evidence. We had Ben's total support. My heart, which had been racing for days, finally settled into a rhythm of grim determination. We didn't sleep. We spent the remaining hours rehearsing the conversation, ensuring our narrative was tight, professional, and focused entirely on corporate risk and compliance, not personal drama. We had to prove this wasn't a jealous wife's fantasy. It was an organized campaign against a senior executive. The feeling of stepping into that cold corporate conference room on a silent Sunday morning was surreal. The stakes were monumental, but as I smoothed out the wrinkles of my printed-out smoking gun, I knew that after 4 years of letting this ghost linger, I was finally ready to exorcise her from our lives. HR's open door was the next step, and there was no turning back. The Sunday morning silence in the factory office was absolute, broken only by the distant, rhythmic hum of the ventilation system. Ben and I walked into conference room B, a sterile, windowless space, and faced 3 extremely serious people. Mr. Thompson, the CEO, Martha Jennings, the head of human resources, and a stern-looking man from the legal department. This was the moment of truth, the opening of HR's open door. The atmosphere was not one of casual corporate catch-up. It was cold and intensely professional. We were all business, and I immediately realized my strategy of focusing on corporate liability and compliance was the right one. This wasn't about my marriage drama. It was about protecting the company from a severe professional risk. Ben started, his voice calm and authoritative, exactly the director of operations they relied on. He didn't rant or accuse. He laid out the facts. Mr. Thompson, Martha, this is a serious and potentially litigious situation involving my assistant, Maya. We are here to report a clear case of professional stalking, long-term premeditation, and a conflict of interest that poses a risk to company stability. Martha Jennings, the HR head, was a sharp, middle-aged woman with a clipboard and an expression that conveyed she had heard every workplace story imaginable. Ben, we appreciate the immediate escalation. We need facts and documentation, not conjecture. That was my cue. I leaned forward and slid the sealed envelope across the table. It contained a printout of the old text messages, the analysis of Maya's double-meaning threat, and Ben's bullet-pointed list of her recent professional sabotage actions. We have both, Martha, I said, my voice steady. This envelope contains documentation of an inappropriate, emotionally abusive text exchange between Maya and Ben 4 years ago, long before she worked in this division. The key exchange, I pointed to the printed page she was now reading, shows Maya explicitly stating her long-term intent to pursue Ben, concluding with the chilling phrase, "I always get the job I want." Martha's eyes widened slightly as she read the text. The legal director immediately leaned in. This wasn't typical workplace flirting. This was evidence of a long-term, calculated strategy. Ben then took over, detailing the second half of the evidence, Maya's current behavior. Her subsequent transfer to my direct office, a highly coveted and strategic move, combined with her recent pattern of behavior, is the execution of that threat. She has repeatedly made deliberate minor errors, the subtle sabotage, such as falsifying customs codes or booking inappropriate venues for critical meetings. She then fixes those errors, positioning herself as my indispensable savior. She is manufacturing a crisis dependency cycle to undermine my professional standing while making herself appear critical to my success. This is an attack on a senior executive. I added the final, crucial point. She knew I had recognized her, and she has repeatedly engaged in psychological intimidation towards me, culminating in her public insinuation at the dinner that I was not a supportive partner. This proves the personal motivation behind her professional actions. Her motive is not career advancement, it is personal obsession. The legal director spoke for the first time, his voice grave. This history, coupled with the clear evidence of subsequent, detrimental actions in her current role, constitutes a massive violation of our professional conduct and anti-harassment policies. The conflict of interest is profound. If this were to become public, or if she were to successfully compromise Ben's work, the company is exposed to enormous liability. Martha closed the file. We have enough. This is an immediate termination for cause, effective immediately, pending a full internal investigation. We cannot afford to have an employee in such a sensitive high-access position who has a documented history of obsession and is actively undermining a director. Ben, you will immediately change all your passwords and revoke her access to all systems. Then, a surprising complication. However, Martha continued, she is an employee. She will be called in this morning and given the opportunity to explain or defend her actions. We need to maintain due process. Ben, you and Natalia need to go home, stay completely offline, and remain out of the office until we contact you. She will be escorted off the premises. The sheer relief that washed over me was almost incapacitating. It was over. We had won. The truth, backed by documented history, had instantly trumped her carefully constructed facade of professional competence. As we were gathering our things to leave, Ben looked at the CEO, his expression still resolute. Mr. Thompson, I want to be clear. I was naive years ago, and I regret not handling this more decisively then. But Natalia was the one who saw the pattern and found the evidence. I fully support her actions and the steps HR is taking. The CEO just nodded. Duly noted, Ben. Now go. We have a fire to put out. We walked out of that sterile conference room, back into the quiet, echoing hallway of the factory office. We had put our marriage on the line, and we had prevailed. But as we drove away, I couldn't shake the chilling thought that Maya wouldn't go quietly. I had just witnessed the moment of the system's victory, but I hadn't yet seen the moment of her defeat. That final, dramatic reaction was yet to come. We spent the rest of Sunday in a state of nervous limbo, glued to our phones, waiting. Ben had changed all his passwords and revoked Maya's access to the major factory systems from his personal laptop, a small act of digital self-defense. Finally, late that afternoon, the call came from Martha Jennings, the head of HR. Her voice was clipped and professional. It's handled. Maya has been terminated for cause, effective immediately, based on a clear and documented history of professional misconduct and harassment. She was escorted from the premises after a brief exit interview. The relief was monumental, but my curiosity was a gnawing ache. I needed to know what she had said. What was her final play? "Martha, thank you," I said, unable to hide the urgency in my voice. Did she confess? Did she give any explanation for why she did this, why she came back? Martha hesitated, a rare break in her corporate composure. She didn't confess, Natalia. She maintained that the texts were a misunderstanding and the mistakes were just that, simple human error. She's threatening to sue for wrongful termination, of course, but legal is confident we are protected by the documentation. However, during the exit interview, she did say something to me. She asked me to pass a message to Ben. My heart hammered against my ribs. What did she say? She said, "Tell Ben that I didn't need his love. I just needed him to fail spectacularly so he would finally see me as the only one who could fix it. And that his wife is much smarter than I gave her credit for." The fallout and revelation, her final bitter explanation, hit me with a profound, terrifying clarity. It wasn't about love or even revenge. It was about control and validation. She didn't want the happily ever after with Ben. She wanted to prove that she was the only one capable of managing his professional life, even if that meant orchestrating its destruction. She was driven by an obsessive need for professional acknowledgement, and the easiest way to get that was to make him completely dependent on her in the chaos she created. The compliment, "His wife is much smarter than I gave her credit for," was the final venomous cherry on top. It was a concession of defeat, but one laced with resentment. I relayed the conversation to Ben. He was quiet for a long time, staring out the window at the setting sun. "She wanted me to fail," he finally murmured. "She was willing to damage her own career just to prove she was better at mine. That's not love or infatuation, Nat. That's something pathological." The next day, Monday, Ben went back to the office, a very different man. He was paranoid, focused, and utterly reliant on his own judgment, which was exactly what he needed to be. He spent the entire morning systematically auditing the past 2 months of his work, every schedule, every order, every customs form that Maya had touched. He found minor discrepancies everywhere, tiny seeds of potential failure that Maya had planted but hadn't yet had the chance to fix. A critical vendor's contact information was subtly changed to an outdated number. A key project deadline had been moved back by 48 hours in the digital calendar, which would have put the whole team behind. He came home that night exhausted but relieved. "You saved my job, Nat." She had a network of tripwires set up. "If you hadn't gone to Thompson when you did, the whole thing would have collapsed this week, and she would have been there, the only one who knew how to fix the mess." The immediate professional fallout was managed by HR and legal, who handled her angry, empty legal threats. The rest of the office, however, was buzzing. A director's assistant, here one day and gone the next, escorted by security on a Sunday? The official reason given was a serious breach of corporate ethics and a conflict of interest. The unofficial reason, the one that spread like wildfire through the factory floor grapevine, was far closer to the truth, painting her as a manipulative force who had targeted a senior executive. Ben's team was initially destabilized. They were used to Maya's hyper-efficiency, albeit manufactured. For a few weeks, everything was messy again, chaotic, just like before Maya arrived. But this time, the chaos was honest. It was just the workload, not a planned attack. Ben hired an interim assistant, a long-time, utterly boring administrative professional named Gary, and for the first time in his career, he prioritized balance. He delegated more to his actual team, realizing he had become too dependent on a single gatekeeper. He started leaving the factory on time, or at least setting hard limits. He finally understood that his intense focus on work wasn't just stressing our marriage. It was creating a massive professional blind spot that Maya had ruthlessly exploited. I knew the story was over, the antagonist removed, but the final, most important piece was the resolution between Ben and me. We had survived an attempt to destroy us that was more calculated and more patient than anything I could have imagined. Now it was time to put the ghost completely to rest and solidify the trust we had fought so hard to protect. The immediate shock of the fallout and revelation slowly subsided, leaving behind a stark clarity. Maya was gone, but the lesson she taught us, unintentionally, I'm sure, was profound. This final section is about clearing the air, resolving the emotional core of the story, and affirming the hard-won trust between Ben and me. The months that followed were characterized by a quiet, determined healing. Ben's office was functioning smoothly again, run by a very competent, very unobsessed professional named Gary. The rhythm of Ben's life returned to one that was challenging but honest, free from the manufactured drama of his former assistant. The most important repair work, however, happened at home. We spent hours talking, not fighting, about that initial breach of trust 4 years ago. Ben finally understood that his dismissal of Maya as harmless had never been about her. It was about his own failure to fully recognize the seriousness of his emotional boundary lapse under pressure. He hadn't just shut her down. He had shut me out of the final, painful details, convincing himself it was minor so he wouldn't have to face the real damage it had done to us. When I read that printout, the "I always get the job I want" line, Ben confessed one evening, holding my hand tightly, I realized I hadn't just been stupid back then, I had been arrogant. I thought I had everything under control, both professionally and personally. And that arrogance was the exact vulnerability she targeted. She didn't need to steal me, she just needed to prove I was weak, and that she was the strength I needed. I forgave him fully that night, not for the first time, but for the final time. It was a true, complete forgiveness that came from understanding the full scope of the attack. We both realized that our biggest failure wasn't the initial crisis. It was burying the truth instead of fully dissecting it. We had healed the surface wound, but Maya had found the residual scar tissue and plunged a knife right back in. The entire experience changed our marriage for the better, making us partners in a completely new way. Ben now involves me in his professional stress, not as a source of blame, but as a sounding board. He trusts my intuition now, not just my logic. When something feels off, he listens. A few months after the incident, a small package arrived at our house, a thick manila envelope, unaddressed, simply marked, personal. Inside was a very expensive, very beautiful pen. No note, no sender's address, nothing. It was obviously from Maya. It was a bizarre final punctuation mark, a strange gift perhaps meant to say, game over, well played, or maybe just a twisted attempt at closure. We looked at it for about 30 seconds, then Ben walked straight to the trash, dropped it in, and tied the bag. Her chapter is closed, he said simply. We don't need souvenirs. That was the true resolution. Not the HR report or the firing, but the deliberate joint decision to discard her memory, her influence, and her final attempt at contact. If there's one thing I want you to take away from this terrifying, bizarre story of factory office espionage, it's this: trust your instincts. My heart stopped the minute I saw her, and my initial fear, my gut feeling that something was deeply wrong, was correct. Ben dismissed my concerns as jealousy or paranoia because her competence blinded him. She was a professional ghost, but I knew the truth of her existence, and I didn't back down. That initial painful realization I tried to bury was the very thing that eventually saved my marriage. Don't let anyone, especially not someone who claims to be objective, professional, or just helping, convince you that your deep-seated unease is irrational. Sometimes, that knot in your stomach is your subconscious connecting dots your conscious mind hasn't even noticed yet. My suspicion, armed with evidence and Ben's eventual trust, was the only thing that could stand up against her 4 years of calculated patience. So, Ben and I are stronger now. We understand that trust isn't a passive gift. It's an active, daily choice to be transparent, to listen, and to always put the relationship before the job, no matter how chaotic that factory office gets. And now, the ghost is finally gone. The machine is clean.